What do you do when your beer is stopped fermenting, and how do you fix it? Stick around to find out. Okay, to begin with, the best way to find out if your beer is fermenting or not is to take a specific gravity reading with a hydrometer. Although an airlock bubbling can be an indication of fermenting, it's not a good enough way to know if it is or isn't fermenting. The same is true of looking at the surface of your fermenting beer to see if there's any sort of movement or krausen or anything like that. Okay, so once we're sure that our beer is not fermenting, how can we be sure what the cause is? Well, let's go through a few ideas. First of all, one of the most common problems for new brewers with a starter kit is actually that the yeast they're using is not alive. It's past its usable date and it's actually expired. So always be sure that you're using yeast that is in date and you won't have this problem. If this has happened to you, the best way to fix it is to buy some new yeast, making sure that it's not expired, and to proceed with a new, fresh yeast starter. Another cause of beer that's not fermenting is, especially for all grain recipes, is if you're using a low malt or a low corn or rice mixture. And this just means that the yeast probably doesn't have enough food to actually do its job. By food I mean the fermentable sugars that we want in the malt. If you think this might be an issue for you, head over to your local brew shop and pick up some yeast nutrients in a little packet, put it into your fermenter and add a new yeast starter. So if you haven't sufficiently aerated the wort before you pitch the yeast, it might not be able to do its job because it's suffocating. So a few fixes for this: if you're able to open your fermenter, you can give it a little stir, although this is not the best option as it could easily introduce bacteria into the wort, and that's not what we want. Another good method is to use some sort of aeration device, similar to those sort of devices that we use in an aquarium. So you can have a little pump that aerates the water as it's fermenting. And another option is to use a carbonation stone, which you pop into the fermenter and it will react with the liquid and actually introduce oxygen that way. And of course, you're going to also have to use a fresh yeast starter. If none of the above reasons seem to affect you, a fourth cause is temperature. When it comes to yeast, it's a little bit like the Goldilocks effect. It's either too hot, too cold, it has to be perfect. So if your yeast is too warm or too cold, it's not going to be converting those sugars as efficiently as it would in the ambient temperature. So the best fix to this is to go and look at the instructions on the yeast packet you're using, or to do a bit of research online for that particular yeast strain and just check what the ambient temperature is. If you need to raise or lower the temperature, you can do that. Also remember that as the beer will ferment, it's going to change the temperature, so it may not be the same as the outside temperature. So it's always best to have a thermometer on the actual the fermenter, either a stick-on one or one that you can introduce into the liquid. Another very different issue is called stuck fermentation. This is when fermentation begins as normal, but it seems to stop or stall and it doesn't reach the final gravity that you've been given as an estimate in your recipe. So as I said earlier in the video, the only sure way to test whether or not a beer is fermenting and has finished fermentation is to check the specific gravity. If you think you've got stuck fermentation, check the specific gravity of your beer, and if it's within 15 to 30% of your estimated final gravity, then you're probably okay to move on to the bottling or kegging stage. However, if it's not in this range, then yes, you have got stuck fermentation and there's a problem with your yeast. Now the problem here is what a lot of inexperienced brewers will do is just add extra yeast directly to the beer that's fermenting, or not fermenting in this case. But the problem here is if you put yeast directly into that beer, even the trace amount of alcohol could poison the yeast and it's going to die. So make sure that you proceed with a fresh yeast starter so that the yeast is in the best condition to carry on fermentation directly it enters the wort. So if you're not quite sure how to prepare a yeast starter, or if you want any other information about these problems that I've spoken about, head over to my website at beercreation.com/fermentingfix. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, that way you won't miss any other videos that I upload in the future. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.